All right, so today we're going deep on something pretty crucial, and it's something that's impacting pretty much every part of the planet,
Yeah,
global warming and how it's impacting our oceans.
right. And you know what's kind of wild is just how much information is out there about this stuff and
Yeah.
how much is going on beneath the surface that I think most people just aren't aware of.
Mm, yeah, and I think that's why we're doing this deep dive. We've got a ton of research uh, that really kind of paints this picture of what's happening, and we want to boil it down to the most important parts for our listeners.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people hear about global warming and climate change and they think, okay, yeah, it's bad. But I think what we're going to try to do today is really dive into, the specifics of how it's actually affecting things.
Yeah, like what does it actually mean for our oceans? What
Exactly.
are the tangible things that are happening?
Right. And not just like the big picture stuff like rising sea levels, right? We're
Yeah.
talking about the acidity of the oceans and how that's changing and just the ecosystems, how entire ecosystems are being reshaped by this.
And we're talking about all this other stuff too,
Right.
like plastic pollution, which
Hmm.
is this whole other beast. Dead zones in the ocean,
Oh, yeah.
which is terrifying.
Yeah.
Overfishing, all this stuff that we think about as like separate problems, but they're all kind of tied together.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing that people really need to understand is that you can't just look at one of these issues in isolation, right? They're all
They
connected.
all feed into each other.
Yeah, they're all part of this larger web. And so I think our job today is to kind of untangle that web a bit.
Yeah, and figure out like what's really at the heart of it all.
Exactly. Like, what are the mechanisms? How are these things actually working together? And what does that mean for the overall impact?
Okay, so let's start with I think one of the most obvious consequences of global warming,
Sure.
which is that the oceans are getting warmer,
Yeah.
right? And the data that we've got really shows just how much heat the oceans are absorbing from the atmosphere.
And it's not just the amount, right? It's the rate at which it's happening, I think. We have these models and predictions,
Yeah.
but the reality is it's accelerating much faster than we thought.
Yeah, like exponentially faster.
Yeah, and that's what's really pushing these ecosystems past their tipping points.
Yeah.
We talk about tipping points, and
Mm.
it's not like it's this gradual warming,
Mhm.
it's this rapid shift, and that has huge consequences for everything living in the ocean.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think a lot of people have heard about is coral bleaching.
Right.
And I think the image that comes to mind is just you know corals turning white, but it's so
Yeah.
much more than that.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just a cosmetic thing, right? It's not just that they're losing their color.
Yeah.
That you have to think about coral reefs as these underwater cities. They are teeming with life.
Yeah.
And the corals themselves, they have this symbiotic relationship with algae that live in their tissues. And that algae is what gives them their color.
Oh, wow.
But also, really importantly, it provides them with nutrients.
Okay, so it's like essential to their survival.
Yeah, it's like their food source, basically.
Mhm.
And when the water temperatures rise, that relationship breaks down. The corals expel the algae, and that's when they become bleached.
Oh, wow.
And so it's not just that they look different.
Right.
They're actually weakened. They become much more susceptible to disease. They can actually die.
Oh, wow.
And so for you, as a listener, what that means is we're losing these incredibly biodiverse habitats.
Right.
Coral reefs support something like a quarter of all marine life.
That's a huge number.
It's huge. And so when you lose coral reefs, you're not just losing the corals themselves, you're losing everything that depends on them.
Yeah, the entire ecosystem
Right.
and all those species that rely on those reefs for shelter and food.
Exactly. And so, it's this ripple effect throughout the entire ocean.
And the source material that we've been looking at also talks about how this warming water
Right.
is contributing to rising sea levels,
Mm-hmm.
which is something that I think a lot of people, hear about,
Mm-hmm.
but it feels very far off.
Yeah, it feels like this distant threat,
Yeah.
but it's not, it's happening now.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is the connection between the warming water and the rising sea levels.
Right. Well, warmer water expands.
Oh, right. Yeah, just like basic science.
Yeah, thermal expansion. It takes up more space. And so that combined with the fact that glaciers and ice sheets are melting at an accelerated rate.
Oh, yeah, that's all that fresh water flowing into the ocean.
Right. And all of that is contributing to this steady rise in sea levels. And so it's not a future threat. We're already seeing it.
Yeah.
Coastal communities around the world are experiencing more frequent and more intense flooding.
Yeah, like, those images that we see on the news of like, streets that are just completely underwater.
Right. And that's becoming more and more common. And, if you live near the coast, this is going to impact your infrastructure, your way of life.
Yeah, it's not just like a minor inconvenience. This is a major disruption.
Exactly.
And it's not just human communities that are being affected, right?
Right.
The source material really emphasizes the impact on the actual ecosystems themselves.
Absolutely. You've got these coastal wetlands, mangrove forests.
Yeah.
These are vital habitats.
Yeah, they're like the nurseries for so many species.
Yeah, they're where a lot of marine life, is born and grows up, and they're being inundated and eroded by these rising sea levels.
Ugh.
And you've got this saltwater intrusion into freshwater sources, which, totally throws off the balance of these ecosystems.
Yeah, it's like a domino effect.
Exactly, and it's all connected to this rising sea level.
So, we've talked about the warmer waters, but there's also this other thing that's happening because of all the CO2 that we're pumping into the atmosphere.
Right.
And that's ocean acidification. And the source that we're looking at describes it as a slow-moving disaster, which is, kind of a terrifying way to put it.
Yeah, it's like this creeping threat that I think a lot of people just aren't aware of. And the thing that I think is really interesting is just the chemistry behind it.
Yeah, and like break it down for us.
So the ocean absorbs a huge amount of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Right, it's like a carbon sink.
Exactly. And when that happens, it triggers all these chemical reactions, and those reactions lower the pH of the ocean.
Oh, okay, so the ocean is becoming more acidic.
More acidic, exactly. And that's where the slow-moving part comes in. It's happening gradually over time.
Right.
But it's having a huge impact on marine life, particularly organisms that build their shells and skeletons out of calcium carbonate.
Oh, like shellfish?
Yeah, shellfish, corals, things like that.
Okay, so explain why that matters.
So they need these carbonate ions that are dissolved in the seawater to actually build their shells and their skeletons.
Oh, okay, it's like they're building blocks.
Exactly. And as the ocean becomes more acidic, those building blocks become less available.
Oh, wow.
It's like pulling the rug out from under them.
Yeah?
And so it makes it harder for them to grow, harder for them to reproduce, harder for them to survive.
And that's not good.
It's not good at all. And then, you've got this cascading effect up the food chain.
Right, because if they can't survive, then
Then the things that eat them can't survive.
yeah, it's all connected.
Exactly. And eventually that's going to impact you.
Us. Yeah, the things that we eat.
The seafood that you eat.
Yeah.
It all comes back to us.
Okay, so we talked about, warmer waters, rising sea levels, ocean acidification. And I think it's really important to kind of zoom out for a second and think about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
We've talked about the impacts on ecosystems, but what does this actually mean for people?
Right.
For coastal communities, for the people who depend on the ocean for their livelihoods.
So it's not just about, like you said, the water creeping further inland, right? It's about losing these critical habitats. These habitats buffer coastlines from storms. They filter water. They're home to a huge variety of marine life. And when they're gone,
Yeah.
we lose all of those benefits.
Yeah, and we've seen that, with hurricanes and things like that, where
Right.
those natural barriers are gone, and then the damage is so much worse.
Right. And then you think about, the displacement of coastal communities.
Yeah.
Often indigenous populations who have lived in these areas for generations.
Right.
And their livelihoods, their entire way of life is based on the ocean.
Yeah, fishing coastal resources.
Right. And so when those resources are gone or when their homes are literally underwater,
Yeah.
that's a huge social and ecological challenge.
Yeah, it's like a humanitarian crisis.
It is a humanitarian crisis,
Yeah.
and it's something that we're already seeing happening around the world.
So it's not just this, far-off future problem. It's
Right.
happening now.
It's happening now.
So, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this. Like, it's such a huge problem.
Yeah, it feels really daunting.
Yeah, but the material that we've been looking at, it does offer some hope. It talks about things that we can do, as individuals to help mitigate these effects.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, because it's easy to feel powerless in the face of something this big.
Right, like what can I actually do?
But there are things that you can do that can make a difference.
Yeah.
And the research really highlights a few key areas.
Okay.
One is reducing your carbon footprint.
Right, which seems obvious, but like how do we actually do that?
Well, it's about supporting the transition to renewable energy sources,
Right.
Wind, solar, things like that.
Yeah.
Being mindful of your energy consumption at home.
Okay, so like turning off lights, unplugging things.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Little things like that can add up.
Yeah.
And then even considering your dietary choices.
Oh, yeah.
Reducing your consumption of meat.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the meat industry has a huge impact on greenhouse gas emissions.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that significant.
It's huge. So even reducing your meat consumption a little bit can make a difference.
And speaking of food,
Mm-hmm.
the food that we eat, the source material, also talks about sustainable seafood.
Right, and that's a big one.
Yeah, how can we make sure that we're making sustainable choices?
So it's about choosing seafood options that are caught or farmed in a way that doesn't harm the environment.
Okay.
So, looking for certifications like MSC for wild caught seafood or ASEC for farmed seafood,
Okay.
and really just being aware of where your seafood is coming from.
Yeah, and I guess asking questions, right?
Yeah, exactly. Don't be afraid to ask questions at the grocery store, at restaurants.
Right.
Find out what's sustainable in your area.
Yeah.
And, support organizations that are doing work to protect and restore marine ecosystems.
Yeah, because it's not just about, what we do as individuals. It's about supporting the larger efforts.
Right. It's about making sure that there's funding and support for the research and the conservation work that's happening.
Okay, so uh, we've talked a lot about the impacts of climate change, but there's also this other huge issue,
Yeah.
which is plastic pollution.
Right.
And the numbers are just staggering.
Mm.
That stat that I think is really shocking is that
Oh, it's
8 million tons of plastic enters the ocean every year,
every year.
which is the equivalent of dumping one garbage truck of plastic into the ocean every minute.
It's hard to even comprehend that scale.
It's crazy. And it's not just, an eyesore.
Right.
It's actually having a devastating impact on marine life.
Yeah, and it's impacting them in so many different ways. You've got the larger debris entangling animals.
Yeah, like sea turtles and whales and things.
Exactly. They get caught in this plastic and they can't get free, and so they end up injured, suffocating, drowning.
Yeah.
But then you've got the even more insidious problem of ingestion.
Right, so they're eating the plastic.
Yeah, they mistake it for food. Seabirds, fish, even tiny plankton are eating these tiny pieces of plastic, and it can block their digestive tracts,
Oh,
leading to starvation, malnutrition.
that's awful.
Yeah, it's really bad. And then you've got microplastics, which are these tiny fragments that are just everywhere.
Yeah, I've heard about those.
They're in the water column, they're in the sediment, they're in the air we breathe.
It's crazy.
And the research is showing that they're now even being found in the tissues of deep sea organisms.
Oh, wow. So it's like pervasive. It's everywhere.
It's everywhere, and we don't even fully understand the long-term consequences of that.
Yeah, like what does it mean for us, for the health of the ocean?
It's the big question.
Yeah, it's kind of terrifying.
It is, and it's something that we need to be taking very seriously.
Okay, so, we've talked about all these problems, but the source material also talks about some potential solutions.
Yeah.
And one of the things that it emphasizes is the importance of marine protected areas.
Right.
So what are those and why are they so important?
So marine protected areas, or MPAs,
Okay.
they're basically like underwater national parks.
Okay.
They're designated regions where human activities are restricted or prohibited in order to conserve the natural environment.
Okay, so it's like giving those areas a chance to recover.
Exactly. And it's about giving marine life a safe haven.
Yeah, a place where they can thrive.
Right. And the research shows that these protected areas not only safeguard biodiversity,
Okay.
but they also enhance the resilience of surrounding ecosystems.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so they can actually lead to healthier fish populations that spill over into adjacent fishing grounds.
Oh, wow. So it's a win-win.
Yeah, it's a win-win for the environment and for the economy.
That's awesome.
And they also provide opportunities for scientific research and environmental education.
Yeah, so it's like this multifaceted solution.
Exactly.
Okay, so, another issue that the source material brings up is ocean dead zones,
Right?
which I think is something that a lot of people haven't heard about.
Yeah, it's not something that gets a lot of attention, but it's a huge problem.
Yeah, so what are they and how are they connected to climate change?
So ocean dead zones are areas where the oxygen levels in the water are so low that they can't support most marine life.
Oh, wow. So it's like a suffocating environment.
Exactly. And it's all tied back to climate change because warmer ocean waters hold less dissolved oxygen.
Okay, so that's part of it.
Yeah, and then you've got changes in precipitation patterns.
Oh, right, because of climate change.
Right. So you get more runoff from land-based agriculture and other human activities, and that runoff carries nutrients into the ocean,
Okay.
and those nutrients fuel the growth of algae.
Oh, yeah, like those algal blooms that we see.
Exactly, and when those blooms die and decompose, they consume huge amounts of oxygen.
So it's like a chain reaction.
Yeah, and that's what creates these dead zones.
And obviously that's bad for marine life, but how does it impact us?
Well, it's a huge threat to fisheries,
Oh.
tourism,
Well-
the overall health of marine ecosystems and the economies that depend on them.
So it's another one of those things where it's like it seems far removed, but it's actually directly impacting.
Exactly. We rely on the ocean for so much,
Yeah.
and these dead zones are a real threat to that.
Okay, so let's talk about overfishing.
Sure.
You know, it seems pretty obvious that taking too many fish out of the ocean is bad,
Right.
but the source material really gets into the specifics of how it impacts the entire ecosystem.
Absolutely. So when you overfish,
Yeah.
you disrupt the balance of the food web.
Okay.
You take out too many individuals of a particular species, and that can have cascading effects.
Yeah, because everything's connected.
Right. And it's especially problematic when you're overfishing keystone species or top predators.
Okay. What does that mean?
So those are species that play a really important role in the ecosystem.
Okay.
They help to keep populations of other species in check, and when they're gone,
Yeah.
the whole system can collapse.
Oh, wow. So it's like removing a Jenga piece from the tower.
Exactly. And so you can have the decline or even the collapse of entire fish populations.
And what does that mean for us?
Well, it means that we lose a valuable food source.
Right.
It means that fishing communities lose their livelihoods.
Yeah.
And it means that the ocean loses its ability to function properly.
Right. Because it's all about balance.
Exactly. And overfishing throws that balance way off.
So, that brings us back to sustainable seafood,
Right.
which we talked about earlier. And it's not just about, oh, I want to eat, healthy fish or whatever. It's
Okay,
about,
the future of the ocean.
yeah, like making sure that there are fish for our kids and grandkids to eat.
Exactly. And sustainable seafood is about making choices that support responsible fishing practices.
Okay.
Minimizing bycatch, which is the unintentional capture of non-target species.
Oh, right. Like dolphins getting caught in fishing nets.
Exactly. And protecting critical marine habitats.
Yeah. So it's about thinking about the bigger picture.
Right. It's about making sure that the ocean can continue to provide for us.
Okay. So, we've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah, it's been a deep dive.
It has been a deep dive. And, it's clear that our oceans are facing a lot of threats.
Multiple threats, all interconnected.
Yeah. And it's easy to feel overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But I think the key takeaway for me is that
Yeah.
there are things that we can do.
There are.
We're not powerless.
Right. And I think the research makes that very clear.
Yeah.
Individual actions matter.
Yeah.
Collective actions matter.
Yeah.
And we need to be doing everything we can to protect our oceans.
And I think it's really important to remember that, global warming isn't just one problem.
Right.
It's like an amplifier. It's making all these other problems worse.
Exactly. And that's something that we need to be really aware of.
Yeah. So as you're listening to this, I want you to think about what you can do in your own life.
Yeah.
To make a difference.
Even small changes can have a big impact.
Yeah, and think about, what can you do to spread the word?
Right.
To get other people involved.
Because this is a problem that we all need to be working on together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I guess the final question for you to ponder is, what is one thing that you can do
Yeah.
that if everyone else did,
Right.
it would make a huge difference for our oceans?
That's a good question to think about.
Yeah, and I don't think there's one right answer.
No.
But it's something that we should all be thinking about.
Absolutely.
What is our individual responsibility?
Right. What can we each contribute?
Yeah, and how can we work together to ensure that our oceans are healthy for generations to come?
It's the big question.
It is.
And it's one that we need to be asking ourselves every day.
Absolutely. All right, well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time.